Welcome to the Disability and Philanthropy Forum's 2021 webinar series, brought to you by the President's Council on Disability, Inclusion, and Philanthropy. My name is Emily Harris, Director of the President's Council, and I use she, her pronouns, and am proud to be part of the disability community. I come to you from the land of the Council of Three Fires, the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, now known as the City of Chicago. As part of our commitment to disability inclusion, our panelists and I will each provide an audio description of ourselves. I'm a white woman with dark curly hair, wearing rectangular glasses and a multicolored shirt with a black jacket over it. Behind me is a screen made of rectangles of blonde wood and white paper. A few housekeeping items for today's webinar. We have live captioning today. There are two ways to access these captions. Use the CC button at the bottom of your screen and choose subtitles or full transcript, which will pop up as a box on your screen within Zoom. Or to access the captions in a separate window, see the link to the external caption viewer in the chat. Today, only our moderators and panelists will be on camera. You will be muted throughout the event. This event is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording in the next few weeks. Although we will be using the chat to share links with you, it will not be available for you to communicate out. Instead, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to share questions anytime during the session, and we'll have some time to share them with the panelists at the end. If the Q&A is not accessible to you, feel free to send your questions to assistant@disabilityphilanthropy.org. And please note that even if we run out of time to answer your questions, they will inform the resources we create on the Disability and Philanthropy Forum. Check back early and often. We will be tweeting live today and hope that you will join us on social media using the hashtag #disabilityphilanthropy. You can also follow along by connecting with us on Twitter @disphilanthropy. We're delighted today to continue our conversations about how disability intersects with all dimensions of social justice. Disability is a natural part of the human experience. According to the CDC, 1 in 4 adults, that's 61 million people, have a disability that impacts major life activities. Disabilities can be apparent, such as a mobility disability that causes someone to use a wheelchair, but many disabilities are non-apparent, including chronic illness and mental health disabilities. Disabilities can be lifelong or acquired. We're the only minority group that anyone can join at any time. The COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the systemic oppression of people with disabilities, and at the same time is increasing the size of our community. And in honor of Pride Month, intersections of gender, sexuality, sexual orientation, and disability could not be a more timely topic. To moderate our panel, I'm delighted to introduce Ana Oliveira, President and CEO of the New York Women's Foundation. Her bio and those of the panelists are linked in the chat. Ana, take it away.
Thank you, Emily, and welcome everyone. I'm Ana Oliveira, and I'm an immigrant, Latinx, queer lesbian woman. I am wearing black jackets with a black t-shirt underneath and a very colorful scarf that has stylized images of cats. I also wear dark rimmed glasses, and I have black hair, and I'm a light-skinned Latina. I come today, I'm in the land of the Lenape, which is also where New York is, and I am also a member of the disability community with a less visible disability. This is a very important conversation to me because both in this collective road to justice that we are, one of the most important goals, one of the most important lived experience that I want to have is the experience of wholesomeness. And the question of our aspect of our identity, our conversation is an.
And Anna, I just want to break in and let you know your audio is cutting out just a bit. Okay, it sounds like we have you back. Feel free to continue.
Better?
Yes.
Okay, so then I will take the earphones, the mini earphones that I had on, and just speak directly into the mic. So rather than let's begin the conversation. And rather than, as Emily just said, review the very impressive bios of our panelists, I want to refer you to the fact that you have access to those materials, to their bios, and I want to ask each one of them, Robin Wilson-Beattie, Victoria Rodríguez-Roldán, and Leslie Templeton, to please do their own sections. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask you to take 2 minutes, each one of you, to do that. So Robin, would you like to begin?
Okay. Hi, I am Robin Wilson-Beattie. I am presenting to you from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone people here in the San Francisco Peninsula. I'm in San Francisco, California. I am a disability and sexual and reproductive health educator, speaker, and writer. I am a person with a disability, both visible and hidden. I am a brown woman, I am wearing black glasses. I have kind of large, curly, shoulder length, long hair. I am wearing a headband with vintage headband with daisies on it. I have on daisy earrings. I am wearing a green dress, and I have in the background my living room with a screen. And I am very happy to be here.
Victoria.
Hello, everyone. I am Victoria Rodríguez-Roldán. I am I'm based out of what was Potomac land, currently known as Washington, D.C. area, greater D.C. area. And for description's sake, I have black hair, Latina, pink eyeglasses, pink headphones, and almost a pink shirt. I have an artificial background of the Dr. Stardust from Doctor Who. I do identify someone with a disability, with multiple disabilities. I'm autistic, and I also have bipolar, and arrived in the disability community through the mental health sphere, believing in a nothing about us without us perspective. So, yeah.
And Leslie.
Hi, y'all. I'm Leslie Templeton. I am a white woman with red hair. I am sitting in front of a black backboard and a white wall. My pronouns are she, her, and I am currently residing on the occupied land of the Lenni Lenape, New Jersey. I personally am a survivor of domestic violence and sexual violence. So I'm a huge advocate for people who are also survivors with disabilities. I have multiple disabilities. I'm epileptic, I have ADHD, I have kidney disease, and I have mental health conditions. I'm really excited to speak with all of you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So I would like to ask you to talk about what is the significance of disability rights and justice to you? What do they mean to you? Can you give us some examples of how they play in the issues related to gender, sexuality, sexual orientation, and also if you can add the perspective of your lived experience, and how has that connected you passionately with this? And maybe we will do the other way around, beginning with you, Leslie, and then we'll go to Victoria and then to Robin.
So disability justice and rights are a very important part of my life. I grew up with a 504 and an IEP in public school. So I had to learn early on how to advocate for myself and advocate for my rights. I had teachers who would try to deny me my 504 rights, wouldn't give me extended time, told me that I can only get a C if I used my accommodations. So that's how I really got into disability rights. Disability justice to me is really important within the disability community, because I think that a lot of the times when we think about disability, we think of disability as a monolith. But disability combines so many different marginalizations. We have Black disabled people, sexual minorities, disabled people, trans disabled people, all these people who are facing very unique situations and problems within the disability community that you can't really cover by just saying disability community. So I think this is one of the most important topics to talk about, the difference between disability rights and disability justice. Really taking it from a disability justice lens is talking about those marginalizations, the intersectionality of those marginalizations, and the individual experience of different disabled people within the disability community.
Thank you. Victoria.
So I would say what got me into disability rights and eventually disability justice was more as an adult. I was already, the psychiatric case of the family. Everybody has that kid growing up in their family who is like that. But it was around law school, around the point of having to basically come out of the mental health closet after having come out of an LGBTQ closet a long time before that, and trying to handle emotionally all the barriers that are placed around legal practice and law school to people with mental health disabilities. So that's the point that I am like having to start advocating for myself and so forth. And from there, it became a matter of trying to both accept that I identified as someone with a disability and having to intersect that with my own trans identity. And from there, it became a matter of acting around justice. Like for me, disability justice around mental health is the fact that if I were to have a heart attack, this works better if I am in person. If I were to have a heart attack and everyone freaks out and calls 911, the people that will arrive are paramedics trying to stop the heart attack from killing me and take me to hospital. But then if it were a mental health related emergency, the people that will arrive after that 911 call are armed big men with guns, basically. So I would say that's what truly gets me into disability justice from a trans perspective, of the intersection of how we're all criminalized and marginalized by society.
Thank you. And Robin, please, your perspectives.
Okay. Well, how I came into disability justice, is particularly in reproductive health, was born out of my own experience. In 2004, a rare birth defect was discovered in my spinal cord, and it was killing me because I was basically having an aneurysm inside my spinal cord, right? So I had some experimental surgeries that were planned. I found out a week before these surgeries to remove the avian that I was pregnant with my now 16-year-old son. So that was a crash course in having to learn how to self-advocate and having to learn how to advocate for my reproductive health rights. And as a Black woman living at that time, I was living in the South, and I was living and the doctors that I encountered were predominantly white males. I all of them insisted that I terminate my pregnancy. I was told once by a doctor who looked at me, who said, "Hey, if you knew you were going to be like that," referring to my paralyzed body, because that was the result of the surgeries to remove the aneurysm, which I'm happy because, I'm here. But he was like, "Why didn't you use birth control or something?" And so, hearing, all of that, I just remember at that time just being really angry and really overwhelmed, because coming into acquiring a disability, but also having to deal with things like race, my reproductive health rights, my sexuality, and realizing also how little the medical profession knew about disabled bodies and pregnancy. That basically was the impetus. That's what got me started. And that is there. That is one of the really big issues. And so that's become my life's work, is to talk about that. But that was my experience with this, and how I came to disability justice and, disability rights and reproductive health and sexual health advocacy.
Thank you. Thank you. So I wanted to ask you, before we go to someone else, Robin, can you talk a little bit more about, the current interplay? How do you see that interplay? The other examples, other issues, other manifestations of, I'm going to say, belief in the values of ableism in reproductive justice,
Yes. Oh yeah, I can talk about that. How long I got? No, just kidding. But when it comes to ableism within reproductive health, okay, one, we can go back to even looking at the this also going on now, where eugenics, basically, where people have decided that people with disabilities should not have children, should not have families, to do not, and have their reproductive health rights taken away from them by being sterilized. You have there's so many different issues, like there's racism involved with the ableism as well. And so you find, it's regional, and you will find that, like for instance, in the South, it was predominantly Black women, that were, had this, that were sterilized, right? And then, but in California, you have Latino women and Native American women all over. And so, and particularly when I'm talking about disability, not just physical disability, but also like mental health. So, and then, or if you have a child, getting it taken away, so all of these things are related, but also particularly around sexuality, because ableism says that people with disabilities do not have rights to, or they don't think of people with disabilities as having sexuality, even though sexuality is a natural part of being human, just like disability is a natural part of the human condition. So, you have people, you have where society tries to tell you that, oh, well, can you have sex? Are you supposed to have sex? I had one time I was in a presentation and they were like, shouldn't you have a doctor's note or something? So very, our bodies, medicalizing our bodies to the point to where we don't have like this autonomy and agency. That's all ableism. That ableism is basically prejudice against the disability. It's having those stereotypes and ideas in that what disability means and what that means that you're able to do, and what you have the right to do. And so that to me is like, so, I encourage people to, think about these things, and especially in their work and in their own life. And when you're looking at somebody that's disabled, and there's like layers upon layers, and talking about like the different intersections, because the experience, for instance, of someone who is white and male with, say with a spinal cord injury, like I have a spinal cord injury, their experience is going to be different in how they're treated. I saw a lot more things about how helping men with spinal cord injuries with, doing like using techniques so they can produce sperm, so that they can, so they can ejaculate, so that they can have families. I'm not seeing the same amount of support and research for women or for, uterus owners for having, children. So, and those sort of things, because I found that out from my own experience in trying to find resources while I was pregnant with a spinal cord injury. So, anyway.
Thank you. Yes. So that makes me actually want to go to you, Leslie, to comment that you talked about and your own sexuality, your own. And I also wanted to specifically ask you about, what do you think? How do you think is the visibility, invisibility, the lens, the presence, the understanding of the relationship between disability and sexual violence, particularly as we are in a very powerful Me Too movement times? So following and connecting with what Robin just shared with us, how do you see this in this other aspect?
Well, when we think about sexual violence, a lot of times we think about it as women experience sexual violence. But what we do see is that most of the people who are experiencing sexual violence are people who are in the disability community. 20% of females on college campuses report having faced sexual violence, while 30% of disabled females have experienced sexual violence on college campuses. And now when we talk about the ableism within it, is that there aren't a lot of resources for disabled people who are experiencing sexual violence. There's not even a lot of data on it. When we see a lot of the data is all around very like stereotypical disabilities, around like intellectual disabilities. But we're not talking about how disability in general impacts your experience of sexual violence, especially if you have a pre-existing mental health condition, or the fact that a lot of the times after you experience sexual violence, you develop a mental health condition. Sexual violence could be the precursor to developing disability. A lot of people who experience sexual violence will come out of it with trauma, and that trauma causes disability, mental health conditions. It can cause physical health conditions. It can cause long-term, even long-term brain damage, just from the stress of it. I think that one of the biggest issues that we face right now within the disability community and sexual violence is that, again, disability is seen as a monolith. We're seeing a lot of the research towards sexual violence and with disability geared towards white, middle-class disabled people. We're not or people who are in institutions. We're not looking about the broadness of disability and sexual violence. And because of that, we're not looking at how trans disabled people are impacted, Black trans disabled people, and who probably most likely, based on other data, have higher rates of experiencing sexual violence. There's also the fetishization of disability that also contributes to sexual violence. We see this a lot with dwarfism, and the idea that this fetishization then permits people to own someone else's body. They feel like they can step in and control someone else's body. And this idea of control, again, is really connected to ableism, the idea that you can control someone because you are abled and you can take advantage of the fact they are disabled. And I feel like this happens a lot more than people realize. It's something like 90% of people with intellectual disabilities face sexual violence once in their life. And I mean, even sexual assault, I like to say that sexual assault is a form of violence. Any type of sexual assault or anything like unconsensual is sexual violence because you are taking the autonomy away from someone. Disability in general, when we talk about disability justice, it really centers on the idea of autonomy. So sexual violence really goes around with that because you're stealing the autonomy from someone else. You're taking someone's autonomy. And yeah, I would say that that has the biggest part, that's the biggest connection between sexual violence and ableism. The fetishization, the lack of resources, like if you're deafblind, there really isn't a lot of resources to even go after. Like if you are experience sexual violence, there's not a lot of resources you can go that are accessible or places you can go that are accessible to report. There's just a whole gap in how we can, how we support and people with disabilities who experience sexual violence and the resources that we have for them.
Thank you. And Victoria, you know, we are evidently in Pride Month, and it's an opportunity to highlight the needs, the presence, the justice issues around LGBTQI communities. So I particularly want to ask you about how do you think that in our community, LGBTQI community, the visibility, the understanding of that intersection with disability is, and then in particularly about trans and disability justice?
So I would say one of the issues that we see the most is basically the perception and attitude that if you're disabled, you couldn't possibly have a sexuality, or you couldn't possibly have a right for relationship or whatnot, much like Robin was talking around having children and whatnot, and having a family. We see along the lines of basically assuming you're asexual. You couldn't possibly be the object of sexual desire or having sexual desire. So let alone things needing things like birth control or whatnot for sexual education, especially in intellectual and developmental disabilities. And in the process, we see in, for example, in the case of trans autistic people, or trans people with mental health disabilities, those disabilities being used as a barrier to transition, where it's along the lines of, no, you don't have dysphoria, you couldn't possibly be trans, all of this is just your disability. You don't know, we're gonna deny you your autonomy or the ability to affirm your identity and assert your identity. And in the process, it becomes a barrier. Another example of this is legal, is just how conversion therapy bans in most states do ban conversion therapy for minors under the age of 18, but under the logic of they can be coerced by a guardian or by a parent because of instead of being adults. But in the process, we're leaving out adults over 18 who are under a guardianship because of their disability. Guardianship is the ultimate civil death for an adult, and basically makes the guardian control everything about their lives. And in this case, even in states that have banned conversion therapy for minors, with the exception of the District of Columbia, where I helped pass that bill, you can cause the situation of having that law that required, and in the process being a barrier to being able to go to Pride or be able to be with people, with like-minded people, and so on. So, and in the process, we also see it as a barrier to mental health care, it being a barrier along the lines of, we're going to misgender you, we're going to see it as a symptom of your mental health, your mental illness. In the case, for example, of ABA therapy, in the case of autistic people, which is frequently seen as a form of torture in many ways by autistic self-advocates, it is essentially coming from the same roots of conversion therapy, along the lines of we're going to treat the symptoms regardless of whether the symptoms are bad or harmful or not. It's all around, we want you to fit the stereotype and mold of who you are. And in the process, we are failing to acknowledge the idea of the diversity, of neurodiversity of everyone being an integral part, with being an integral part of who we are in our society. When the same thing happens around the LGBTQ people. And another problem is within the disability community, it is often, historically, it has effectively been run by and for like the elders of the disability community that are still coasting on the passage of the ADA as their main achievement, is primarily cis, straight, and white, basically, and pale, still, and male, to paraphrase Rebecca Coakley. But in the process, what that leads to is seeing the LGBTQ community and movement as a separate thing, as a separate affair, instead of seeing it as an integral part, because people with disabilities are like a fifth to a third of the population. Thus, everybody is disabled. Everybody of any demographic is disabled, and LGBTQ people with disabilities are thus not seen as an integral part of the disability community, and instead are being told, when it comes to advocacy, choose an identity and you have to stick to that, basically, instead of be who you truly are. So, yeah.
Terrific, thank you. So I'm going to ask each one of you to make a kind of a double set of comments. One is, what do you think is working? And what do you think that philanthropy, what is your advice to philanthropy? Robin, I'm thinking that philanthropy might want to hear from you about the issues around disabled parenting. And what would be your advice? What are they, and what would be your advice for philanthropy? Leslie, I'm thinking that perhaps you can tell us how the women's movement, in particular the Women's March, and your advice for philanthropy is dealing with disability and what philanthropy should do. And Victoria, also the same thing from you, and your advice to philanthropy, and perhaps a little more about what you found in terms of the support for mental health in New York State. What is the data about that, and what philanthropy can also do about that? So let's begin with you, Robin.
Okay. Now, this is one of, okay, when it comes to, disabled parenting, there needs to be support on all kinds of different levels, okay? First off, acknowledging, yes, that people with disabilities, have families, have children, or want to have children, or don't want to have children, child free, but some people. But one of the things though is having that support, having having a supportive housing situation, having access to resources, to help, to and when I say help, I've seen like in other countries where you have a care worker come in, to like when you have a baby or you have a child, and to make sure that you're coping okay, give you some advice, some assistance. The same way that I also see how we have in-home support systems, like IHHS is in like I know the city of San Francisco has that. So and all over to help people stay in their homes, right, with disabilities, and help with their daily living activities. I see where we should also have, and I've also seen this work, where you have the same sort of thing though, but for disabled parents who might need that sort of assistance as well. And so basically an in-home human support. That is something, but I've actually, like I said, I have seen that work because like I'll just say it like a case study, and because it's also a friend of mine, was someone who was living in a small group home who kept saying, I want to have a baby, I want to have a child. she had formerly grew up in an institution, then got out of that in a group home, then, went out, got pregnant. And so what the community, because luckily, she was part of this disabled community, a very supportive community of self-advocates, and, part of like, or still like very involved in disability advocacy. And so managed to get her and her child in a supportive housing situation to where they have like their own apartment and things, but also like support workers, to help, coordinate things like, going to get groceries and going to do, buy things like diapers and things like that, or, or just even in some classes and learning how to do things, and learning, those sort of things. And she and her child they're thriving. But they have that assistance and they have that help. That's like tangible stuff that can happen a lot of times. And also people with disabilities, they'll find themselves stuck in a situation, like it can be an abusive situation, because like finance, all these reasons that sometimes people stay with someone that has that economic power. And especially if you are in an interabled relationship, I can go on all day, I'm sorry, but yes, like if you're in an interabled relationship, you might not have that, you don't have that economic power or that social power, to say that, like in an event of divorce or something, that you get custody. There are so many cases of people with disability getting their children taken away from them, particularly if they have a spouse or partner who doesn't have a disability, then automatically they get, because due to ableism, all of that. So I can see support in the forms of like legal aid, supportive housing, also, domestic shelters for women and children, but also for disabled, people. So that I could come up with a myriad of ways, but
super helpful. And I want to invite everybody, as you are listening to our incredible panelists, clearly we want to answer your questions. So please use the chat function to do that. So you can continue listening to them and then we can answer your questions. So Leslie, what would you say? Tell us about the Women's March. Tell us about movement marches, dealing with disability. Is something working? And if so, what?
Yeah, I would love to talk about this. Being on the Women's March board and being one of the disability representatives of the Women's March board and being the head of the Women's March Disability Caucus, I've seen a lot of how disability can be mutually beneficial when we talk about it in philanthropy. One of the big ways is that not only when you're talking about disability issues, you're bringing in an entire new population of people who care about disability issues and want to support your work. And at the same time, you're bringing that issue to a broader audience, your existing audience. So when you talk about disability, you're not only helping the disability community, you're helping yourself. You're bringing a bigger audience to you. There is nothing that you could do that would be negative. There's no negative in that situation. It is one of the best relationships you can have. What we do at the Women's March, we had in the beginning of the coronavirus, or back in fall, actually, we were talking about disability justice and and coronavirus. And so we had a panel and we had hundreds of people come in. We got more people to get involved with the Women's March, and we had more people learning about the issues around disability justice and coronavirus. That includes vaccine access, that includes medical access. We talked about racism and ableism combined when we talk about access to healthcare that's affordable and high quality. It was incredibly successful. I would say personally, maybe I'm a little biased, but I think it was one of our most successful panels. It was really great to be able to bring this message, this
Yes.
this marginalization to the forefront of a women's movement, and talk about how marginalization, like the women's movement, can be a great place for disability issues to take place. Again, 1 in 4 people are disabled. So that is a huge population. So when you're talking about disability issues, like I've said, it will bring in more people, but you're also helping the disability community because you're bringing in people who typically wouldn't know what's going on in the disability community to these issues. Another thing I would have to say is that one of the reasons why it's worked so well for us in the Women's March is that we have actual disabled people talking about these issues. We have people who have lived experiences talking about these issues, bringing these issues to the forefront, and being a part of the solution to these issues. We're not going out of our way and having people speak on top of people or speak for people. We want people who know what's going on, have lived this every day of their lives, and do this work to be speaking on it. And it's been really successful because these people are the ones who have the networks to provide supports. They probably have multiple experts on these kind of topics already at hand because they've worked in it, and they know what they're talking about. I cannot stress that enough, that one of the best ways to make it successful for your organization to enter disability rights and enter disability justice in that sphere is to ensure you are including disabled people in the conversation, letting them lead those conversations, and making sure that when you bring them into your org, it's not just like a token. You're actually letting them be involved. They're getting a voice, they're being able to speak, and they're running these issues.
Thank you. And Victoria, so we would really like to hear your thoughts further. You're talking about mental health, mental illness as a disability. And I also want to ask you to talk about the intersection, the crossings between the justice system and disability.
Of course, I've been engaging in a lot of research that should be published in the Director Law Review, which is around the assisted outpatient treatment system, using New York State as an example, and partly because it was the first state to do so, to enact such a program in 1999. And one of the issues that was happening in it is that it is essentially an involuntary treatment order where you can be forced by court to submit to mental health treatment, but it is outpatient treatment, unlike the involuntary commitment where you're forced into a hospital against your will. And what I found when going through all the statistics provided by the New York Department of Mental Health, by the New York State government, was that the bulk of people subjected to these orders were people of color, either Hispanic or Black, depending on the classification used for New York State. Especially in New York City, especially in the 5 boroughs. But essentially, it created a very disproportionate amount of minorities, racial minorities, being the subject of these orders. Most of them had a diagnosis of schizophrenia. So obviously, it creates the question of where were all these white people with schizophrenia, basically. And in the process, wherever they are going, it is essentially not to providers that are likely to call the police or submit court a request for involuntary treatment, or primarily going to private insurance or private hospitals and so on that are less likely to resort to the court system. So essentially, the argument that I'm making in this piece and from this research that I hope to continue in other states is that it has become effectively a tool of racial control, an extension of the criminal legal system where it tries to disproportionately impact and arrest and incarcerate people of color in the state. And an example of this in California is that Disability Rights California has had to sue Alameda County, the home of Berkeley and Oakland, the eastern part of the Bay, for disproportionately the majority of the people subject to 5051 orders in that county are Black people. which tells you a lot about who is responding, who is calling the police on who for mental health crises, why is the police responding to those, and so forth. And we've been ignoring these so far because they are often confidential and rarely forming part of the statistics, criminal charges, or whatnot. So that is the subject that I've been working on. It should be published very soon in the academic journal of the Drexel Law Review at Drexel Law School in Philadelphia. And I'm hoping to take it on further in other spaces as a subject, hopefully when we secure funding for it or whatnot, since this was initially a side project.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. So I'm going to ask just each of you to say one sentence of what philanthropy, how philanthropy can integrate, what should philanthropy do to integrate the disability lens in our work. One sentence. So Leslie, let's begin with you.
Make sure you're involving actual disabled people in these conversations and letting them lead projects and giving them the opportunity to make these spaces inclusive. I would say that would be probably the best way to make it the most successful relationship between disability justice and philanthropy.
Thank you. Robin.
Okay, really quick. When you are including these disabled people in your initiatives, make sure to pay them. Budget for paying educators and for people with disabilities. We want, I want to educate, but anyway, that's it.
Lived knowledge, lived experience is knowledge. Needs to be paid. Excellent. Victoria.
Can you repeat the question real quick?
Yes. Your biggest advice to philanthropy.
Require the organizations you're funding to have social justice and disability justice outcomes, and to be employing a minimum amount of people of color leading these projects, basically.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Emily now. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. There are a number of questions and also just great acknowledgement of the powerful things you have said in the Q&A. I'll start with a question about what are, from your point of view, the main barriers to have equal opportunities with non-disabled women. This questioner says she has the impression that we always remain an afterthought, particularly in strategies and policies to tackle domestic violence. At least in Quebec, there is a lot of resistance to make accessible the shelters for women who wish to break a cycle of violence at home. One of you want to jump in on that?
I would love to talk about part of this. I really like how you brought up the fact about domestic violence. It is actually a huge fact that disability and domestic violence isn't talked about a lot. And because of that, we see a lot of people who are survivors of domestic violence having issues getting out of these situations. And when you bring up the accessibility for shelters for women who have experienced domestic violence, we see this a lot with classism, racism, sexism, that these shelters, whether they're homeless shelters, domestic violence shelters, even food pantries, they're not accessible to people with disabilities. And it's a huge issue facing so many of us who are struggling. When we look at these, one of the ways that we can really impact this is through philanthropy and talking about these issues, getting these issues out. A lot of the times they're not accessible because of pushback, but also because they're not informed. They don't know that this is actually a real thing happening. Like Robin talked about, and we're seen as asexual a lot of the time. So why would we be in relationships in their mind? They don't see it as a necessity. They don't see it as a need. There isn't this need in their head. They don't want to spend the extra money if they don't need to. What we need to show is that there is a need, there is a problem going on, and there is a need for this. I think that's one of the best ways to talk about domestic violence in general. There is a need to talk about domestic violence and disability. people don't know that it exists. I think that that's one of the biggest barriers right there. We have statistics that show it. We have the research that shows it. We need to be able to advocate for these people and make sure resources are accessible, because they're important. I don't care how much it costs. You need to make it accessible. If you're creating resources for domestic violence survivors, they better be accessible, because, you know, one of the biggest groups I feel like will face domestic violence is going to be people with disabilities. And also coming out of domestic violence, again, a lot of these people are going to be disabled, and they're going to be physically disabled. They're going to have mental health disabilities. They're going to have health concerns. This is just how it is. And if we're not making these resources accessible off the bat, you're completely missing an entire population of people who are facing these problems. And I'd say that's, yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in, Robin?
Oh, I just wanted to actually, yes, build on exactly what Leslie was saying, because I have a concrete example here from where I am. I live in San Francisco, which has a lot of really great programs, and we have this brand new office. It's the first in the country for it's for sexual assault response program, you know, and prevention, right? It was something that was passed by a bill and a measure, and, you know, and so the office was created. All of these years that it was in the inception, design, all of it, disability wasn't mentioned at all. So when like the opening ceremony happened, and, you know, showing up at City Hall, and I get there and I'm looking and I was like, so what about disability? Have y'all talked about? And nobody had thought about that. That was not even just in the purview. So I'm one of those, okay, so you need to join, you know, but, you know, it got to the point to where it's like, okay, I'm giving advice and helping interview candidates to be the new director of the center. None of the candidates, out of all of the people that we were interviewing, when we'd ask them about what kind of marginalizations do you think are important to address when it comes to domestic violence, and when it comes to everything was mentioned, from immigration status to, you know, being monolingual in a non-English language, everything under the sun but disability. So I had a voice for what, but I felt like I haven't been participating as much, because I'm, like I said, I believe in paying people for if they are giving so much of themselves and their expertise and that sort of thing. So and, you know, I only have so much time, but that needs to be, that's like a concrete example of, and it's a wonderful work that they're doing, and I'm thinking it's amazing that there is this office. But often people, they aren't, like Leslie said, they don't think that people with disabilities are, you know, in relationships, or, you know, that this is a concern. And so, you know, but not only like just making accessible to get in there, having, you know, being able to have access to interpreters, to be able to have, you know, maybe, you know, pictorial, because not everyone is able to read letters, being able to have things pictorially, be able to have stuff in Braille. There are a lot of ways that people can be supportive in that, and also providing funds to make those materials, because I know that it's expensive to create things, and I guess to make things in Braille, or, you know, to caption videos or whatever, the kind of outreach stuff. So that was just something, I'm sorry, that when Leslie started talking about that, I was like, yeah, I have an example.
That's great. I want to get to two more questions that I'm going to combine into one, because we have limited time left. And these are questions about philanthropy. The first question is, are there foundations that any of you work with or are aware of that you would lift up as really centering the disability community in the co-creation of what they fund and how they fund. And Anna, feel free to talk about that too. And then related to that, and maybe this is too much for our remaining couple minutes, is it better for philanthropy to support disability efforts specifically or push mainstream efforts to be more inclusive, like you were just talking about? So somebody want to take that, examples of foundations that are lifting the community up?
I think we need more work in philanthropy to be able to have we all want to be able to say 4, 5, 6 foundations minimum, you know what I mean? We're clearly not there, but maybe, Robin, I see your hand there. Maybe you do have somebody want to uplift.
You're on mute, Robin.
I was telling you, okay, yes, there are disabled parenting network. There are disabled parenting groups that have been funded, that have been formed by an organization that's been formed by disabled parents, you know, as a form of advocacy, but also as support and help, because we've found a lot of times that community is how we help find solutions. And I would encourage, and I can leave some in the, I guess, the chat, some organizations that I think would be really great that could use some support. Also, I wanted to mention Sins Invalid because of their work in disability justice, sexuality, education. Sins Invalid is an amazing organization that spreads message, but also, you know, they also, members of them, you know, they're the ones that came up with that theory of disability justice and what that means. So I'll put some of those in the chat.
Great, thank you. And check out on our website, the Disability Inclusion Fund, which is a participatory grant-making foundation, learning about how to lift those voices up. So I am just going to close us up. I wish we had time for more Q&A and discussion with our incredible panelists, but I want to go to the final slide here, which is to let you know that we have a next conversation about the intersections between disability and other topics on climate change and disability. This one's going to be a tough act to follow. You all have been absolutely phenomenal and I've learned so much, but please do join us on September 23rd. Following the close of this session, you'll receive a short survey. Please help us learn from your experiences by taking a few minutes to fill it out. A link is also available in the chat. Your feedback from this webinar will inform our future webinars in this series. We look forward to continuing to learn together and to continue learning. Please sign up on our website, the Disability and Philanthropy Forum. You can find it at disabilityphilanthropy.org. You'll receive newsletters and come back early and often to explore the videos and curated resources that address the journey to disability inclusion. Little advertisement, our panelists will be posting blogs in the next several months, continuing their exploration of this incredible topic. You can also connect with us on social media. And finally, if you are a grant maker and today's discussion has convinced you of how essential disability inclusion is to fulfilling your mission, please encourage your organization to sign on to the President's Council new Disability Inclusion Pledge. You can learn more at disabilityphilanthropy.org. This conversation today has given me a lot of hope and a lot of excitement about the work that all of the panelists are doing on the ground, the work that the New York Women's Foundation is doing to integrate disability in its participatory grant-making programs. And I'm so grateful to all of you for sharing your day with us. Thank you.